On Sunday night, we're starting Chanukah. On Sunday night, Chanukah, it's a festival which will last us for 8 days. And it's a time where family get-togethers, friends get together, we have different parties, people eat many donuts. Actually, you go to the stores nowadays, from Sukkot until Chanukah, all you see is just donuts. And then for the whole year, you don't see these donuts anymore. But besides donuts as well, we light as well. Everyone lights their menorahs. They're pretty small menorahs with small lights. What's the festival Chanukah? We'll discuss. There's quite a few reasons why we have Chanukah. And we'll discuss one of the points why we have Chanukah. Over 2,000 years ago, in the time where Aristotle, and then you had his great student, Alexander the Great. Everyone's heard of Alexander the Great, who must have lived 2,000 years ago. Alexander the Great, or Alexander Macedonia, he actually was 32 when he died. And he was king for 12 years. That means he became king at 20 years old. He was known as Alexander the Great. Actually, many people known as the Great, they weren't so great. But he was Alexander the Great. He was actually great. But from the age 20 till 32, he was one of the big pupils of Aristotle. And in that time, that's when you had the Greek nations, and you had as well the Greek culture, which included literature, art, sport, and science. And they actually wanted the whole world to accept their culture. And initially, there was no physical war between the Jewish people and the Greek nations. Initially, they just wanted the Jewish people who were Torah observant, to exchange their Torah observancy for the Greek culture. The Jewish people, being the stubborn Jewish people, they didn't want to accept it. They wanted to keep to their Torah, and therefore that brought along a war, a physical war, until we had the miracles of Chanukah. The miracles of Chanukah, we had as well, they had a double victory. It was a victory of the physical military war, and it was a victory of the ideological war. Now, as we said, initially, the Greeks just wanted the Jewish people to accept their culture, which most of the world had already accepted their culture. The Jewish people, with their resistance, came along the Greeks and started having many, many decrees. And with their decrees, they put pressure and they decided to abolish quite a few of the fundamental mitzvahs that the Jewish people have. They decided to abolish Bris Milah, Shabbos, and Rosh Chodesh. And of course, they forbade the learning of the Torah. Bris Milah is what we do to a child when he's 8 days old. We remove some skin. They decided to abolish that. They said, no, that's something that Jewish people want to show that they're different. No, we don't want that. We want the world accepting our culture. Shabbos, again. Shabbos is a time where Jewish people actually switch off from the rest of the world. Keeping Shabbos includes switching off the telephones, not putting on light switches, being completely ignoring the whole outside world, and as well, the Jewish people saying again to themselves that we are a separate nation. Again, the Greeks didn't want that. Came a Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is the lunar calendar. The new month is called the Rosh Chodesh, and all the Chagim go according to the lunar calendar. You have a look. Sometimes Chanukah will be in the 5th of December, and sometimes it'll be in the 25th of December. For working people, they're happier when it comes out towards the 25th of December. They have the whole week off then. But as we see, every year Chanukah falls on a different day of December, and that is because they go according to the lunar month. And the Jewish people, we are the lunar month. And again, that's something that the Greeks didn't want. They said, no. We'd like you to accept the Greek culture. And as we know, the ness of Chanukah was that the few Chashmonaim, who are also known as Maccabeim, they actually won the war. They had a victory against the mighty Greek warriors. So we said we have this celebration of Chanukah, and the victory of Chanukah was the victory of the physical military war, and the victory of Chanukah was the idea that they won the ideological war. Now, the war, to go a little bit into history, the war was actually for 52 years. Nowadays, unfortunately, here and there, we have different wars, but they last maybe a month or 2 months. or we had a war which lasted for 6 years, the Second World War. There was 6 years. I had a grandmother who actually went through the camps, and for 6 years is also a very long time. The only thing that took her through was the belief that God would eventually take them out of it and help them come further, and she actually came out and she rebuilt her life, and that's why I'm here tonight. That's why my sister Mimi is here every other week as well. That is with her strong belief that she was able to get through the 6 years. The war, which took place 2,000 years ago, lasted for 52 years. And yet you had these few Maccabeim, these few Hashmonaim, they, with their resistance, were able to fight through, and that's why we have the Jewish people nowadays as well. Many, many Jewish people felt very, very, very influenced by the outside Greek culture. Greek culture, if we take an example, the beginning of the 1900s, where you had the Germans, they were the cream of mankind. It wasn't just like the Eastern Europe, where you had the peasants who would get drunken at night and who would beat their wives. There was nothing to pull the Jewish people over there. However, when you had the Germans, where you had the universities and you had lawyers and doctors, and they had the literature, and there were many, many things that pulled people as well. Yet these few Hashmonaim, they're the ones who resisted, and they eventually won this war. They came back to the Bet HaMikdash, they came back to the temple. The temple, actually, the Greeks liked the idea of the temple. They came inside, and that actually met up to their standards of beauty. All they wanted were a few changes in the Bet HaMikdash. In the temple, they wanted the outer walls removed. They decided that the menorah that they lit over there, this golden menorah as well, they decided that that can be done with any normal oil. It didn't have to have a special oil, which was a non-contaminated oil, which had a special seal on by the high priest. They had a few different changes. But they liked the idea. They actually liked the beauty of the Bet HaMikdash. And came along these Hashmonaim, and they came back into the Bet HaMikdash after 52 years, and they found one small jug of oil that really would last them for one night, and God made a miracle that lasted them for 8 nights. That's where we get the 8 days of Chanukah. So that's the second part of the miracles of Chanukah, that we had this one little jug of oil that should have lasted for one night, and it lasted for 8 nights. But we're going to discuss tonight the ideological war between the Torah and the Greek culture. Let us go a little further back into history. If we look in the beginning of the Torah, we look at the second parsha of the Torah is Parshas Noach. We know about the great flood. There was a great flood, that God brought a great flood to the world, and Noach built his teva, he built the ark, and after being for a year on the ark, he came out with his wife, his 3 sons, his 3 daughter-in-laws, to start the world again. They had in their teva, they had all the animals. The first thing Noach does when he comes out of the teva is he decides to plant a vine. He plants a vine. When the grapes ripen, he pressed them, he made some good wine. I saw there was some good wine outside as well. He took some wine, he drank wine. This must have been the first time he drank wine. He took an overdose of the wine and he fell asleep in a drunken state. He had 3 sons. He had Cham, his descendants are the Africans. He had Yefes, where that's the Western culture, the Greeks, and he had Shem. Shem as well, that's where the Jewish people come, also from Shem, from the 3rd son. This son Cham, he went in, and there's many different commentaries exactly what he did, but using the words of the Torah, he uncovered his father's nakedness, who was lying there in a drunken state, and he came out very proudly telling his brothers what he had done. Shem and Yefes, the 2 other brothers, they were absolutely shocked. They took a blanket and they walked in backwards. They didn't want to see their father as well. And they came and they covered their father. The Talmud tells us each of them, Shem and Yefes, received wonderful rewards for their actions. Shem received the reward, the mitzvah of tzitzis. Any of you know what the mitzvah of tzitzis is? Tzitzis is either it's the prayer shawl that we wear when we daven, and every 4-garment beged, every 4-garment clothes, we put in as well some strings. Maybe people who haven't seen these strings before, they could think maybe every Jew is going out hunting or actually making some nets to catch some fish. But the tzitzis is really on every every four-cornered garment, we put on these strings, and these strings, that's a complete lecture in itself. They remind us of God. They used to have, when we knew there was a special kind of blue string, came from a special fish, the blue would remind us of the heaven, and heaven would remind us of God. And that's how we felt a certain connection, a daily connection, and right through the day we felt a connection, a spiritual connection to God. And that's what Shem received as a reward. He went and covered his father. His descendants received this mitzvah of wearing tzitzis. Which reward did Yefes receive? Yefes received the reward that his descendants would get a respectful burial. To be buried respectfully. Even if they would die at war or somewhere out, his descendants would be respected, very respectfully be buried. Now, there seems to be quite a difference between Yefes and Shem with their rewards. If we analyze it a bit further, when do we wear this garment, the tzitzis? We wear it when we have our soul inside our bodies. When do you bury somebody? When there's just a body left and there's no more soul left over there. Why is there such a difference? Why is there such a difference between their rewards? The commentaries tell us that there was a difference why they actually went inside, why they went inside and covered their father. Yefes, as we said, he was the ancestor of the Greek culture, of the Greeks and of Western culture. He went inside because he saw common sense. His father's lying there naked. He felt that lack of decency. Where's the refinedness over here? He went inside and covered his father. Shem, on the other hand, he saw this as his father would wake up and his father would feel that his dignity has been destroyed and he's been terribly degraded. He went inside to do a mitzvah. He went inside with a complete different intention. He went inside with an intention, my father's going to feel degraded. I need to save my father. He went inside to do a mitzvah. He went inside to do something he felt spiritual, not just common sense. That's why the commentaries say that they received different rewards. Shem went inside, and he went inside to do a mitzvah. His descendants received the reward to get something extra that brings them spiritually closer to God. Yefes, all he did was, he went and covered the body. He received something that covers the body as well. That's what the commentaries explain. That's a little bit history, what happened after they left after the great flood and when they decided to rebuild the world. There's a verse afterwards that's a wonderful verse, and that's a verse that we can all use with us in our daily life. The verse says, Noach woke up and he found out what happened, and he said something. It's almost like a blessing. He said, Yefes should receive tremendous amount of beauty. Beauty is an outer beauty. It's a physical beauty, only skin deep. V'yishkon ba'ohle Shem. And he should dwell in the tents of Shem. The verse tells us he received a beauty, but he should dwell in the houses of his brother Shem. What does this mean? Yefes received beauty. If we know the Hebrew language as well, we say as well, yofi, yofi, yofi. Yefes comes from the word yofi, beauty. That is something as well that he received. He received the physical beauty, and to appreciate the physical beauty, and that's what the Greek culture, that was the beginning of the Greek culture. However, to have a physical beauty without having a certain spiritual depth is only superficial, and it very quickly brings to a destruction. Imagine a man and woman who they only marry because of physical beauty. This marriage is not going to last very long. If there's no depth at all, this marriage very quickly, there's times where the wife is not so pretty, different times she's not feeling so well, she's not up to her regular, to look after herself. If the whole thing's based on a physical beauty, it's going to very quickly diminish as well. The physical beauty without a spiritual depth is out for destruction. A story that I just heard 2 days ago, my wife told me a story. It's actually a sad story, and hopefully it'll be with a happy ending. My daughter, her kindergarten teacher, has a brother-in-law who's meant to be getting married in a week and a half. And a few days ago, they found that he has cancer. Invitations have been sent out. The wedding date has been set already. The hall has been booked. The band has been booked. The photographer, everything's been booked already. Thank God they were able to very quickly, because they told in the hospitals that he was about to get married within a week and a half, 2 weeks. They did all the tests very quickly. As soon as the future wife heard this, she said immediately, I'm still marrying him. How can I leave him alone to go through all the treatments? How can I leave him on his own to go through this difficult time? I'm staying with him right through this. And hopefully he can have now a few treatments and still have the wedding in 2 weeks' time and then continue the treatments. But this is something, if their connection was only a physical connection, a physical beauty, this wouldn't have happened. She would say, would I need these bayot? Would I need these problems? Let me just leave this alone. But no, she came with a full strength. I'm staying with him. I'm going to help him through this difficult time. That's only when there's a certain depth over here as well. There's a very interesting halacha that we take, that the Torah appreciates the beauty of the Greeks. We know that on Shabbos we read from the Torah scroll, from the Sefer Torah. Inside the special ark, we have a Sefer Torah, and we read it on Shabbos. It's made from a special parchment. It's made from a special ink as well. It has to be written as well by a sofer, someone who's learned how to write. It's written by hand. Everything is written by hand from A to Z. It takes a full year's work for him to write it. This Torah scroll, obviously it's written in Hebrew. However, the Talmud tells us it can also be written in which language? It can be written in the Greek language. It can be written either in Hebrew or in Greek. Why? We learn it out from this verse. Yefes, the Greeks have a tremendous beauty, but it has to dwell in the tents of shame. If we take this beauty and we have this blend of the Greek beauty and we give it a depth, we connect it to the Torah, then we get this beautiful combination. And we can read from that scroll on Shabbos inside the synagogue. We can read from this scroll. It's written in Greek as well. However, if we look into history, as we spoke before, Aristotle, he was in a time where there was paganism. It was a time where everyone believed in idol worship. And Aristotle came along and said, the world was created by somebody. Everything in the world had a first cause. That's what Aristotle called it, a first cause. He knew there was a God. And his lessons that he taught around with his philosophy, he was one day suddenly caught doing a terrible, terrible, indecent act. And people asked him, how could you do that? He said, when I do these acts, I'm not Aristotle. Now, they say it about him. A friend of mine told me that it was said about a Yale professor in ethics. I don't know who was told about, but the story is definitely something that we can hear as well. This Yale professor of ethics, they caught him doing something very unethical. And they said to him, your whole lessons, your life, your teaching, you've been lecturing ethics. He said, a mathematician doesn't have to be a triangle. What I teach, I don't have to keep to what I teach. The Greeks, even though it started from the ancestors, this Yefes, who did something that was very, very beautiful, he took a blanket and covered his father. They took the same blanket and uncovered themselves, and they took the beauty to such a step that, as we spoke about before, the Germans, who also were the cream of mankind, my grandmother remembers Dr. Mengele, that he was there with his white gloves, and yet the terrible destruction that they caused as well. That's what happens when you have this physical beauty without a certain spiritual depth. And the Jewish people, even though the Chashmonaim, the Maccabeim, appreciated this beauty of the Greek culture, they said, we can only do that if we have it together with our Torah observance. Let's have it together. To have it separate, we're out for destruction. And all of you here tonight, you are the modern day Maccabeim. You're the modern day Chashmonaim. You could be out there on the streets in the evening times. You're all from Western culture. I assume you all come from, you understand English. So definitely all English speaking, and you're all professionals, and yet you still come here in the evening to hear something. It means you're all looking for a certain spiritual depth. That's a beautiful combination. That's what the verse tells us is a blend of the physical beauty with a spiritual depth, and that was the victory of the Chashmonaim. That's why every year we celebrate Chanukah. That is what we're celebrating. We are celebrating that we have people like you here after 2,000 years of Jews being assimilated and being surrounded and in different countries with all other nations, and yet the Jewish nation still prevails. That's only because we have this spiritual depth. There's a verse that we say in Psalms, in Tehillim we say a verse, we compare the nations of the world to water. We compare them to water. The Jewish nation is compared to a fire. So one of the wise rabbis asked a question, every time a Jew and a non-Jew actually meet each other, that's the water and the fire. The water should extinguish the fire. Why is the Jewish nation still around nowadays? This water, is compared to the nations of the world, they should have extinguished the Jewish nation many, many, many thousands of years ago. So he answered, water only extinguishes fire when they actually come into contact. If you have a separation in between, you have the water inside a pot and the fire underneath, the fire is in control of the water. If the Jewish people keep this separation from the non-Jewish people, if they have this separation, the water and the fire are separate, then we can get this beautiful blend. We can make ourselves a nice cup of tea. You have the fire and you have the water. If you put them together, then the water gets extinguished. That is the lesson of the story of Chanukah, of the Chashmonaim, who are known as Maccabeim. They're the ones who said, no, we need to have this depth together with this beauty, and that's why we are still here nowadays. Now we'll go to something a little bit more practical. We said there were two things that the Jewish nation were restricted. One was bris milah, and one was Shabbos. Maybe we'll start with Shabbos, and we'll come then later to bris milah. Shabbos, why do we keep the Sabbath? We keep the Sabbath because in one verse in the Torah it tells us, because God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh day. Have you ever noticed that it's very interesting that all around the world we have a 7-day week? There's no one who has a 10-day week, no one 5-day week. I think I heard it, maybe some of you know exactly the dates. In the beginning of the 1900s, I think the Russians wanted to make an 8-day week. Any of you heard of this? The workforce would have been like this. They have 7 days a week of work and rest, only 8th day. So they have much more workforce as well. They're able to make much more money in that way. But it didn't work out at all. And everywhere around the world has 7 days. 7 is a very strange number. But this really comes from God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th day. Yet there's a different verse that says that the reason we keep Shabbos is because God took us out of Egypt. We were slaves in Egypt and God took us out. It seems to be a contradiction. But it's really not a contradiction. God created the world in 6 days, and therefore He told us we have to keep Shabbos. Shabbos includes many small things. Keeping Shabbos, someone who keeps Shabbos, there's many different levels, but the level the Torah expects us to keep Shabbos is even putting on a light switch. Someone's going to say, God created the universe. That sounds really absurd. To switch the light on and off, that's going to make a difference. That's going to make the difference. We believe He created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. This small action is going to make a difference. So God tells us another verse, You weren't so small. You were the smallest nation when you were in Egypt. It could have, just like many nations have evaporated over the years. The Jewish people could have evaporated in Egypt. You weren't I didn't think you were such a small nation or were so insignificant to save you. You were the smallest of nations, and I took you out of Egypt. Small actions count. Small actions count. I saw a beautiful story that brings this point of small actions count. There was this man who used to come in the Catskills in the summer. That's where many Jewish people go out to the Catskills in the summer. They have their resorts over there. And there was a Bet Midrash, there was a synagogue over there where people were learning, and comes inside a middle-aged man holding his art scroll Gemara, English translation of the Talmud, and he comes inside every day, and one of the rabbis went over and said, "What's your name? Who are you? Nice to meet you." And he said he's actually suffering from liver cancer, and he has this Talmud with him, and he wasn't able to go. He wasn't brought up in religious surroundings, but he came across this English translation, and this English translation, every day he learns a few lines, and this helps him get through his illness. And he came in through the summer. A few weeks later, he came in, and he looked very down. One of the rabbis asked, "Why do you look very down today?" He said, "My illness has gone worse, and I don't think it makes such a difference. I see all you rabbis learning over here, and I'm never going to be a big rabbi. I'm not going to have any great knowledge. I learn here 2-3 lines. What difference does this make?" The rabbi who heard this, the night before, as we see, there's nothing coincidence in the world. The night before, he was listening to a Jewish radio show, and he heard on a radio show the following story. There was a famous conductor called Arturo Toscanini. I never heard of him before. He was a famous conductor, Arturo Toscanini, and a newspaper reporter came to interview him one evening. And he found him in his house listening on a shortwave radio to a concert. He was listening to a symphony that he had conducted many, many times. And that evening, he wasn't able to be there to conduct this symphony. So he decided to listen to it on shortwave and to hear how the substitute conductor was leading the orchestra. And when the music switches off, the interviewer says, "That was awesome, that was beautiful music." And this Arturo snorts and says, "No, there's 120 musicians, 15 violinists, and tonight there were only 14 violinists." The interviewer thinks he's just being a show-off, this conductor. This Toscanini, this famous conductor, he didn't want to upset the conductor at all. So he says to the conductor, fine, they continue the interview, and in the evening he leaves. He calls a friend of his who was at the concert and says to his friend, "Can you find out for me how many violinists were actually there?" His friend calls him back and says there were 14. Next morning, he goes back to this Arturo Toscanini and he confesses, I have to confess, really, when you told me 14, I thought you would just, threw a number out to show there were really 14. But tell me, how did you know this difference? How were you able to tell there were 14? He said, "You are just like the audience. The audience, you're listening to music. You hear beautiful music. I am the conductor. I know every single note over here. And I knew there were some notes over here tonight that were not being played by this violinist. I knew that violinist number 15, he was not there tonight. I could detect it. For the regular, unsophisticated ear, it sounded like beautiful music. For the conductor, every single note made a difference." This rabbi had heard this story the night before, and he was happy to tell this man. He said, "Me and you think these 2-3 lines that you learn, this extra mitzvah that you keep, this small adherence to this mitzvah the Torah tells us, this doesn't really make a difference. To me and you, we think it doesn't make a difference. But to the conductor of the world's symphony, this makes a big difference. The conductor to God above, who he's the conductor, he knows every single note, he knows the big difference. Very small things count. We have no idea if we give a smile to a friend of ours, and because of this smile, he goes home to his family now. He gives a smile to his wife. He gives a smile to his child. Otherwise, if he wouldn't have had this smile, we don't know what would have happened. He'd have come home. He came home from a bad day at work. His boss shouted at him. He would have come into the house and opened the door and said to his wife, "Why is my supper not ready?" He met somebody on the way home who smiled to him. This smile made his day. We don't know what small actions can count. We're not the conductor of the World Symphony. But every small action counts. And that's the lesson of Shabbos. The Greeks, who they didn't want this extra spiritual connection, they wanted to have this physical, this outer, this skin-deep beauty. They didn't want this deeper connection. That was one of the first things they said, no Shabbos. Small things don't count at all. Another thing they said was also bris milah. Bris milah, we know we take a child who's actually a perfect child, and Rabbi Reiter knows this as well. We take beautiful children who they look, I Baruch Hashem, able to go around all over the country to all different kind of Jewish people from all different levels, and everyone keeps to this mitzvah of bris milah. They're not keeping anything else, but somehow everyone keeps bris milah. The great sage Rabbi Akiva, he met once a Roman, and the Roman said to him, "Tell me, whose creation is greater, man's creation or human's creation?" And Rabbi Akiva answered, "Man's creation." To which the Roman looks at him and says, "Man's creation?" He said, "Yes. God creates the wheat kernel. Man makes the wheat kernel into bread." Rabbi Akiva was already wise enough. He knew if he would say man's creation, the Roman would ask him, "So why do you take an innocent baby who's complete and you start removing skin from him?" But Rabbi Akiva wanted to teach him that's the lesson of bris milah. We are not perfect. The Greek culture says man is perfect. But we, with the Torah, tells us we are not perfect. Man has to improve his character. Man is not perfect. Like we take a baby and we have to perfect him, so too our character, we have to perfect our character as well. And that was, again, a second thing that the Greeks wanted to abolish straight away, was bris milah, to say man doesn't have to perfect himself. But we know man has to perfect himself. Every person has to be able to take a spiritual depth, and then the physical beauty is something just amazing. And again, you tonight are part of this spiritual depth. You are like the Chanukah and the menorah. Whoever's been to the old city, maybe you walk down the stairs to the Kotel, you see there a full-size golden menorah. That's the full size where it's going to be in the temple. It's going to be built very soon, Bimheira. There, it's a golden menorah. Imagine we have a chandelier and there's no bulbs inside. It may be beautiful. But without the bulbs, you can't appreciate the beauty. To have a golden menorah without the small lights, that's the Greek beauty without the spiritual depths. These small lights that light in the darkness, that's us Jewish people looking to be able to have a certain depth as well. And I would like to thank you all for listening as well, and may we celebrate Chanukah. We can think of these things, and even though we spoke in English, we can say a word in Ivrit. Kol hakavod to the audience who come weekly and to look for a certain depth. Thank you very much.